Hey, what's up guys? It has been about 7 years since I last built a workbench. This will be my third one, and it is definitely the best one yet. So here we go. I start by removing any staples from the wood. The whole thing is made with construction grade 2x6s bought from Home Depot. Next, I cross-cut everything to length, and a circular saw can be a really accurate tool if you have a good one and take the time to set it up correctly. So I square off all the ends and then cut everything to length. Once I've got a nice stack of components, I mill them up, starting by jointing a face, an edge, thicknessing on my planer, and finally ripping the final edge off on the table saw. Then I start laying out for the 4 legs, which are going to be mortise and tenoned into the bench top. The tenons on these legs are formed during the glue up. Before I glue up, I cut a notch into one of those 4 boards to create a mortise for the cross rail. Without a doubt, this is the world's fastest and easiest 5-inch long, 3-inch deep, 1.25 inch wide mortise ever made. So I go ahead and repeat those steps and notch out the other 4 legs as well. As I'm gluing this up, I tack it with a couple brads just to keep things from sliding around on me. I really try to keep those brads as much as possible on the inside part of the leg that won't be seen. I glue up the short and long cross rails pretty much the same way, and something I mentioned on my plans is that I put a center line on the edge of both of these boards so that when you glue it up you get 2 equal sized tenons. Once the glue's dried, I go ahead and plane off the glue lines. Okay, pause. I want to mention the bench I'm working on is 30 inches wide, and so is the new one that I'm making. A lot of people think that's too wide, but I really find it to be an ideal width for having plenty of room to work and not knocking tools off the bench either. If you've watched some of my other videos, then you'll know that I always trim my tenons down to length. That's how I get away with having a nice fitting tenon without having to bother with a cosmetic shoulder. Now for the short rails, I will have to cut a mortise. I decided I was going to drill out most of the way, so I put a center line through the mortise to help locate the drill. To help keep my cuts perpendicular, I use this little drill guide, which worked pretty well, but it didn't go to full depth, so I did have to finish that off without the guide. Then I just clean up all the edges with the chisel. The tenon was a little too thick here, which is very easy to thin it out a bit with a hand plane. Once that was taken care of, I planed it to length for a nice fit. Next, I started gluing up the bench top. The underside is facing up. I throw down the glue heavy. I probably should have protected my old bench top from all the glue drips, but as you'll see in a minute, glue cannot stick to my bench top. I sandwiched the tops between cauls as I was gluing it up, which really helped keep it flat and make it easier to flatten later. Although getting that middle caul out after the glue had dried proved to be a little bit of a challenge. I managed to make it through this part without smashing any fingers, but there is going to be a little bit of blood later. I flattened the underside of the bench top, just blasting it off, going across the grain with the scrub plane. Because the top is so wide, I have to spin this around to work from the other side also, and when I spin that, you'll see what happens when glue tries to stick to old cured tung oil. After scrubbing this thing down, I use a circular saw guide as a straight edge to check for flat and twist. Next, I'm going to dry assemble the base in order to lay out the benchtop mortises, but it turns out I forgot to fit one of the tenons. Here we're a little over halfway through the video, and if you're still here, it's probably pretty safe to say that you're enjoying this video. If so, I would really appreciate it if you would hit the like button to help this video spread to more people. Just before the dry fit, I go ahead and chamfer a pretty heavy chamfer on all the edges. I dry assemble the base, double and triple checking that all the joints are fully seated and square before laying out the mortises. I also noticed that the tenon shoulders are not chamfered, so I'm definitely going to have to do that because I know my jeans or something would catch on that and split it out pretty badly. Again, with these big benchtop mortises, I used a drill to hog out most of the waste, and I did have to clamp on a board to the edge to give the drill guide a little bit more support. I'm going to draw bore all the mortise and tenons, so I start by drilling a hole into all the mortises. I mark the tenons. Move the mark closer to the shoulder. And then drill through the new mark. This creates offset holes that as I insert the peg, it's actually going to pull it very tight together. I use 3/8 inch oak dowels for the pegs. I glue it up with some homemade hide glue that has a little bit of urea added that extends the working time. After assembling this bad boy upside down, I had some help to put it back on its feet. Before I flatten the top, I trim off these dowels. To get the top ready, I start by taking the scrub plane and just working straight down the glue lines, and then I traverse it with the jack plane. One reason people like 24-inch wide bench tops is you can sand half at a time through a thickness planer, then join the two halves. This has to be done by hand. You could probably call the top done at this point, but I go ahead and start working it with the grain using a jack plane, and then I go ahead and pretend it's a tabletop, mark some pencil lines, and make it totally flat with the jointer plane. People always ask me how long certain things take, and I'll say this. The first bench top I ever flattened was only 12 inches wide, and it took me multiple days as a beginner. This one took exactly 29 minutes, and I know this because my Fitbit tracked it as an elliptical exercise, and I don't go on ellipticals. After flattening the top, I need to trim the edges. I take care of most of that with a circular saw and finish it off with a handsaw. The vise is going to go here. I thought I was being clever by orienting the grain so that any wood movement would be to my advantage, but as I'm narrating this, I'm about 95% sure I'm going to make a new vise jaw for reasons I'll lay out in a future video. Okay, so if you take anything away from this video, please position your vise and drill the pilot holes while this thing is still upside down and before it's assembled. A vise jaw liner is a must. I'm using Crubber. It's technically a cork and rubber gasket material. I'll put a link in the description. And here again, I'm using my homemade hide glue with a little bit of urea added. It still has a very quick tack, which makes it very convenient for applying something like this. Next, I'm going to install an inset vise for the tail vise. I do that by chopping out a recess using a mortise chisel. As I alluded to earlier, I did not make it through this build without blood. At some point here, I was caught by a chisel, but that's okay. I'm pretty sure if you build your own bench, it's very bad luck not to have a blood signature on it somewhere. Here I'm just forming the escape route for any wood chips that fall into the inset vise. Then I drill a series of dog holes, which are in line with the center of the inset vise. Pro tip, I take a thin CA glue and wick it into the top half inch of these dog holes to prevent it splintering out. Then I soak in a very heavy coat of Danish oil. It's 1 part boiled linseed oil, 1 part spar varnish, and 1 part mineral spirits. Thank you so much for watching, and if you enjoyed this video, please hit the like button, and if you didn't like the video, just hit the like button anyway.